Alright, hello everyone. So let's start the first video of ESS2 for the flipped classroom. So we already met for the first time, and at this point we've been doing an introduction of the class, and also we went through the definition of sustainability, what's sustainability, and talking about that, we in fact saw the impact of human society on the environment, on the earth, and on the fact that our society is not really sustainable. So today we'll be, in fact, with this video, we'll be talking about the human population that, in fact, we can call in general as human sphere, and it's how the human population has grown over time. That will be one of the theme of the topic of today. And as you can see from this first introductory slide, we are close to 8 billion people, 7.7 if we're making a round number, 7.7 billion people living on this planet. It's expected that by about the half century we possibly could hit 9 billion people, with a possible prediction between 11 to 12 billion people by the end of this century. That's just prediction, but at this point we are not sure if we are reaching the full capacity, the full carrying capacity of the planet or not, but we will talk about this in this lecture today. What we will see is that as humans, we tend to do everything extra. We are overpopulating the earth, we are overdeveloping our society, we are over-extracting resources, we are over-consuming, reaching a possible overshoot of the resources of the planet. And so, as a French navigator was saying, Jacques-Yves Cousteau, behind every environmental problem that we are facing today, we always find two issues linked regarding, in fact, overconsumption and overpopulation. Those two topics that a lot of time we tend to face one against each other tend to usually be a reason behind an environmental issue that we are observing. So today, based on the human population, we'll be asking one main central question. This main central question is, how can we achieve sustainable human population? Meaning, how can we be living on this planet, all of these almost 8 billion people, maybe more, and living sustainably, meaning that we are living without any negative impact on our future generation. So to answer the central question of the day, we'll have to be looking at different smaller questions. The first one will be to look at human population growth and to understand how this human population has grown over time. Was it always the same? Has it been different? Then we'll be looking at the cause, the different factors that are controlling the human population growth, and looking at those causes in details. Finally, in the last few points, and last few questions, we'll be talking about some of the major consequences of the actual human population growth on the environment. And to end this class, we'll be talking about solutions. Solutions that we know that can limit and possibly reduce the human population growth and the environmental impact linked to that growth. So to start, we'll have to look at the human population growth and how the population has changed over time. We can look at a graph that showed the world population over the last 10,000 years before present. Initially, at that time, we had about 5 million people who were mostly nomads, meaning that there were people moving all the time. And with the first major revolution, that was in fact the agricultural revolution, people starting to settle down, creating villages and cities. With that, the production of food enough to feed the people, we're starting seeing a natural linear increase over time of the population, going from 5 million people in 10,000 years before Christ to about 12.5 million people 5,000 years after. And when we look at the year zero, we were close to 200 million people on Earth. And during all that time, we can observe a very slight increase of the population that tend to be linear. And that has been this way up to the 19th century, more or less, around 1800, 1850. At that time came into place another major revolution called the Industrial Revolution. With that revolution, that corresponds to the development of machines and high productivity industrialization, we had a bloom of human population that changed from a linear increase into an exponential increase. We reached, in less than 100 years, we reached the first billion people, and then just in decades, we just doubled that up to reaching nowadays 7.7 billion people. So this world population is in fact, this historical world population has two different behaviors. The first one, as we say, is an arithmetic increase, just a linear increase, where we observe from the last 10,000 years a slight increase in human population, pretty reasonable in fact. And suddenly we had a huge exponential increase that give you an idea that something, I mean, if you look at a graph like that, something is not good. Something will go and crash at some point. And this exponential growth is what's kind of frightening a lot of people nowadays. So if we look online, you can find different websites that tend to monitor the world population. All of these websites tend to estimate the current world population. There is no way to have a clear, precise number at this point just by doing surveys. So it's mostly algorithm behind that's calculating birth, death of people based on historical data. And this website, for example, from Worldometers, shows currently at the time of the record of this movie that we're at about 7.7 billion people on the planet. And so if you're interested, you can have more details regarding different countries. You can look at how the birth is evolving versus the death, and see, for example, that we definitely have still more birth than death today. And we'll see, in fact, what that means in terms of the world population growth just a bit later. If we look at those population over time, and the time necessary to double their size, what we can find is initially in the past, 500 years in the past, we were about doubling our population every 1,000 years. And what you can see is with the progress, the human progress, little by little, this doubling time has decreased, meaning that the population was growing faster and faster. With the Industrial Revolution, we were just needing a century and a half to double our population, going from 800 million to 1.6 billion. Then after the beginning of the 20th centuries, we needed less than a century, about 63 years. And recently in 2004, we were about doubling our population every 40 years. At this point, the population is still increasing, but what we can observe is finally this doubling time is starting to go up, meaning that little by little our population is increasing but slower. So we are able currently to reduce little by little the growth of our population. In 2015, instead of being 41 years of doubling time, we were reaching in fact 66 years. So that's a pretty good sign of a possible stabilization of the world population over the next years, probably over the next centuries in fact. Finally, we can also look at the evolution of population over time from where they're living, based on where they're living. And so we can see how the population that in majority were living on the countryside, most of the historical record, most of the human history, has been shifted from a countryside into a city development. At the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, only 3% of the world's population was living in cities. There was no really attraction to it. Most of the cities were dirty, lots of waste, and not so good job to be getting over there. But with the evolution of the society, most of the jobs, little by little, were found into a city that were where we could make most money. more activities little by little start to increase in the cities. And so we saw a shift of the human population that's starting to be more and more urbanized, by about 50% of the world population living in the cities only 10 years ago. And it's projected to be 70% of the world population living into cities by 2050. Why is such a movement into the city? Well, again, because as I said, people are looking for jobs. Cities tend to be the place where you find the jobs. And nowadays, also cities tend to be the place where you have your personal development and activities. And so that's pushing people to be living the countryside, where jobs tend to be more limited, and goes into the cities. The problem, and we'll talk about it in discussion, are the consequences on the environment and on the society for this urbanization happening. So before we finishing this question, I would like also to show you this table that was from 2014, showing you the biggest city on the planet. And what we can see is that Tokyo by 2014 was the biggest city in the world, with 38 million people living in that city. And this, what we call mega cities, because they tend to be over or around 20 million people. Over the 10 biggest city on the world, what we can see is 3 only are from the developed country. We have Tokyo as the first one with 38 million people, Osaka in Japan with above 20 million people on 7th position, and on the last one, New York in the US. That means that only a third of the biggest cities are found in developed countries. Most of the mega cities tend to be found in developing countries. And that has huge also societal impact on those countries. But we'll have a chance to talk about that later in this course. Finally, with the last slide, I just wanted to give you some prediction made by a study from the United Nations. And all of these different predictions based on different scenarios show that in fact the human population will still increase over the next centuries, up to the end of the centuries, with possible growth rate that will fall. Some scenarios, in fact, tend to be optimistic and think that world population will start decreasing, but in general, the prediction that's mostly reported involve a projection by 2050 that will be close to 10 billion people, 9.7 to be exact, and by the end of the century, we should be reaching close to 11 billion people. That's kind of the most current number being given, but again, those different scenarios are based on different conditions, political condition, economical condition, that are all variables depending on the different countries and their politics. But in general, that is supposed to be the number that we expect to see by the end of this century. So at this point, take a small break, and once you're ready, just click on the next video being available on the same web page of this lecture. See you in a bit.